This is Quan, hip hop historian with the Hip Hop Museum pop-up experience in DC. And I'm here with Cassandra Hatton, the VP of Special Projects at Sotheby's in New York. How's it going?
Good, how are you?
I'm well. So I'm here to discuss just some general things about the first auction, hip hop based auction at Sotheby's, and then a few specific things about the items that we secured at the Hip Hop Museum in DC. So really quick, just tell me, as VP of Special Projects, what exactly is your function at Sotheby's? What is your general function that your day-to-day?
It's pretty broad. I introduce new types of sale categories. I'm a specialist in rare books and manuscripts. I also do space exploration sales, science and technology sales, and hip hop is the newest category. So I source the property, I do the research on it, I put the estimates on it, I put the sale together, and I get it sold. So really soup to nuts.
Okay, so hip hop will be a new permanent thing at Sotheby's?
That is the plan, yes.
Okay, great. Now tell me briefly how this came about to introduce hip hop to such a prestigious organization as Sotheby's. How did you guys come up with this particular idea for this?
It's something that I've been planning for 7 years. I got the idea a long time ago because whenever I do auctions, I always do best when I handle things that I love, that I'm excited about. It's a lot easier to sell something if you believe in it.
Yes.
So I made the decision to only focus on things that I really was passionate about a long time ago. And hip hop is definitely one of those things. And when I joined Sotheby's about 4 years ago, I pitched the idea, and I've been lucky in that the places that I've worked have always been willing to let me go for it. You know, I mean, I come from the school of thought of don't ask permission, ask for forgiveness. So just go ahead and do it.
Oh, that's great.
Make sure it's successful and keep going. So because hip hop is, you know, I look at it as a cultural movement, which I think most people who understand hip hop do.
Yes.
It already encompasses a lot of things that Sotheby's already does: contemporary art and jewelry and fashion and photography and, you know, manuscripts and things. So it was really, for me, it was a no-brainer because we're already there. It was just a different sort of category of these objects, but Sotheby's thought it was a great idea, and it seems like the buyers did too.
Definitely. Well, you kind of answered one of my next questions. My next question was going to be your familiarity with the subculture of hip hop before this auction. So you were already a fan of the subculture and the music before. Well, apparently you were, because you put it together. But I say on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, what is your not familiarity, but your interaction with hip hop pre this project?
I mean, look, I'm 42 years old. I'm from Los Angeles. I grew up listening to Wu-Tang and you know, Tupac and Biggie and a Tribe Called Quest. And, you know, this was like the soundtrack of my youth.
Okay.
Everybody I was around was listening to hip hop. So that, you know, that's something about hip hop, as it is, again, because it's a cultural movement. It's not just it's not like, I don't know, punk, right? Where you're just like, I'm really into punk music and you have to have all the albums and things memorized. It's a larger thing.
Sure.
I am always the first person to say that there is somebody else who knows more than me on everything. So I'm definitely not a PhD in hip hop history or anything like that.
Sure.
And that's one of the reasons why I had Monica Lynch come in and help out, because she, you know, somebody who was president of Tommy Boy Records and is much more deeply connected in the hip hop community. So she was really instrumental in helping me put the sale together, because she was able to connect me with a lot of different people. And, you know, the actual putting together of the sale took 2 years. And a big chunk of that was just meeting with people, talking to people, going to shows, having lots of conversations, which is, I think, the most important part of putting an auction together, is getting to know people and know who is who and how people are connected to each other. So Monica was a big part of making that happen.
Well, this is great, because that was my next question. So we're in tune. was her involvement. So that's good. So did you already know of Monica Lynch before? Oh, not of her. Did you know her personally before this, or who connected you with Monica Lynch? Because she is a very powerful player in the business and in the culture.
I knew of her. It was actually Wu-Tang who connected me to her.
Oh, great.
So, Wu-Tang, when they did their incredible one copy album that actually sold to a former client of mine.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Mr. Shkreli.
Yes. That's the famous or infamous
Mr. Shkreli, who is, a huge hip hop fan. They had originally spoken to Sotheby's about auctioning the album there, which I'll have to dig up the book, but somebody wrote a whole book about their experience producing that album and going to the different auction houses. So we actually had the internal contacts with them. And so when I first wanted to do the hip hop sale, they were the first people that I reached out to. And
okay, great.
Silver Rings, who's one of their producers, is the person who connected me to Monica, and then it all kind of went from there. And actually, Monica, when I first spoke to Monica, it was to look at some of the items she had to see if they would be good to include in an auction. But after talking for a couple hours and maybe a couple of glasses of wine, I was like, you know what? Just come do this auction with me. So that's how it happened.
That is great. Now, if there was any item or lot that had a degree of challenge to it compared to what you would usually do in your function as the VP there, what item would have given you the most challenge, if any challenge for any item to actually curate and put together?
Yeah. Probably Biggie's crown. And that was an item that I went out and got. I mean, we kind of proactively sourced the material in the sale, but the way a lot of it came to us is Monica connected me to people, and then those people said, well, hey, I've got this I'd like to sell, or I've got that I'd like to sell. And with the crown, I tracked Baron Claiborne down. I wasn't connected to him via anybody really. I looked him up on Instagram and sent him an Instagram message actually.
Wow.
And was persistent in that. And then from there it was really, what is a $6 plastic crown worth? We didn't sell a plastic crown in that auction. It was really the story and the significance and the symbolism.
100%.
So that was a challenge in the sense that, it was exciting. And that's really what I love to do, is I like to find unique items where nobody really knows what the monetary value is. And I like to tell that story and see how many people agree with me that it is valuable. So that's the challenge that I'm always looking for with an auction. So I think that's the piece that stands out the most.
Certainly. Now, I don't know how anonymous that Baron wants to remain, but do you know how he came in ownership of this particular artifact?
Oh yeah. Baron is the person who took the famous portrait of Biggie, the famous Coney King of New York portrait, which is the last portrait he sat for, because he was killed about 4 days after the portrait was taken. And Baron had gone out, he had the concept of portraying Biggie as royalty, and he went out and he bought 2 plastic crowns. I think it was maybe at Party City or one of these kinds of places.
Yes.
And Biggie and Diddy and there were a couple of other people that came along for the shot. From what Baron tells me, is Diddy did not think it was a good idea, because he thought Biggie was going to look like the Burger King.
Right. Right.
And so they tried on the first crown and it was too small. And so they threw it in the corner, and then they tried the second crown on, and it was still a little bit small, but there was some foam padding on the inside. So they ripped that padding out and put it on his head sideways, and the portrait worked. And Baron had really the clarity of mind to have Biggie sign the crown, and then he signed it and dated it. So that, one thing we always look for in the auction business is provenance. It came from Baron, but also to have that extra layer of documentation.
Definitely. That
really,
is great.
Yeah.
That is great. I noticed the foam in there because, you know, when we were there, you know, I looked at the crown, I saw inside, I saw the autograph, but I also saw the foam, and I wondered what that story was. So this is great information. This is very, very good information.
It's a great example of where, because a lot of people will look at an object and go, oh, there's, you know, oh, it's got a stain on it, or that thing's ripped, or, you know, where there may be some condition issue. But it's an excellent example of where that actually is part of the story of the object. And it doesn't matter. I mean, again, we weren't selling plastic. That the foam and the tearing out of the foam is part of the story, and that's
it really is.
That's what makes it so fantastic.
Yeah, it makes it even more value. That's great. Yeah. What would be the criteria for accepting or not accepting an item? I'm pretty sure that many people wanted to donate, and maybe things were rejected. What's the basic criteria for the acceptance of an item in that particular auction?
Any item that I'm selling, there are a few things that I'm looking for. I want, or not want, but things that do best at auction. Because if we don't put something in a sale, it's because I genuinely don't think that it's going to do well. And so it doesn't do the person any good to put their thing in the auction and have it not sell. So I'm brutally honest with people and letting them know I don't think it's going to do well, or it will. But the things that do best are things that are rare. But really, kind of going back to how things work with the crown, are things with a story. Because that's what I really think of us selling, is stories. The objects, I mean, even if you look at fine art, right, like a Picasso, is the canvas and the paint worth $10 million? It's not worth anything. It's the fact that it's Picasso and the story behind it and what that particular painting meant. So that's what I'm really looking at, is what's the story behind this object, and how many people are going to get excited about this story. So the criteria can change, because also in every sale that I put together, I'm trying to tell an overarching story. So I want the different objects to speak to each other. Mm-hmm. It's a lot easier to sell things if you see a bigger story. So sometimes there's an item that's great, but it doesn't fit into the context of the sale this year. And so I'll tell people, you know, I think this is really valuable, but we're not going to be able to tell its story well this year. Let's wait for next year. You know, let's wait for the next sale. So I'm always thinking about, because, you know, my job legally is to sell items for people and get them the best price possible. So I'm always thinking about what is going to be the best thing for this particular object.
Was there any item or any lot that that gained a much significantly bigger price than what you thought it was? And is there any item that didn't, of the few that didn't sell, that really surprised you?
The item that got the biggest price in comparison to its estimate was the Basquiat Rammellzee K-Rob Beat Bop album.
Oh, yes.
And I think that also, when I put together sales, I like to have objects. I think of myself as constructing Venn diagrams, or like overlapping areas of interest.
Yes.
And that is a great example of hip hop, contemporary art, record collecting. That one, we knew the estimate was low. The 2,500 to 3,500 was a very low estimate. I had seen some examples of the album have asking prices of $14,000, but hitting $125,000 was really, you know, stratospheric. I think that is in part because the album was completely sealed. It had never been opened. The provenance was really fantastic. Corey Robbins, who was the producer, who, you know, Basquiat technically produced the album, but he took it to a record company person to do kind of the technical producing. So it came from him. But he also donated 100% of his proceeds to the Archive of Contemporary Music. So I'm sure they were psyched when they saw how it did.
Yes.
But that, you know, that trifecta of the condition, the provenance, and then having that extra element of charity, I think really drove the price a lot higher.
Right. And And for the listeners who don't know who Corey Robbins is, that's the CEO and founder or co-founder of Profile Records, who signed Run DMC and many other great rap groups of that early 80s era.
Yeah.
And that record is a highly sought after one, and that was an incredible price that is sold for. Amazing.
Absolutely.
Coming to the end here, as far as the items that we secure, specifically the Wild Style animation cell, is there any background story you can tell me on that particular item?
Well, that came straight from the creator. That came straight from Charlie Ahern. That is a fantastic thing because it's also this fusion of history. It's archival, but it's also art. And so you've got that kind of Venn diagram going on again. And also, falls into the realm of film. Generally, you don't see a lot of animation cells come up in the auction world. And when they do, they're usually, Disney related cartoons, where the value is coming from the subject matter, somebody who collects Mickey Mouse or Goofy or something like that, right? So this was another example of an item where the estimate was on the lower side. We really didn't know what it was going to sell for, but we knew that it had a broad appeal. I mean, who hasn't heard of Wild Style? That is like the film, right?
Yes, the seminal hip hop movie.
Yes, absolutely. So we knew there would be a broad appeal. And, something I really like about auctions, and I used to be a dealer. I spent the first decade of my career selling privately. I worked with private collectors and institutions and museums, and you put a fixed price on an item and you sell it for that fixed price. And sometimes you walk away a little worried that you might have left some money on the table, right? Like they were too eager to buy it at this price. Maybe I blew it and underpriced it, But what I do like about auction is it's very democratic.
Yes.
You get the word out. Everybody knows it's happening. People have the opportunity to call you and say, now, wait a minute, I know something about this that you didn't say in the catalog, or wait a minute, that's mine. Somebody stole it from you, whatever, it's information that's public. And I always set the estimates very conservatively because I like to see that the items sell for what they're worth. I let the buyers decide what the value is. The buyers decided that the Wild Style animation cell was above our estimate range. And that's always exciting to see, is like how many people agree that it's a valuable piece. And when things take off, it's a lot of fun to watch.
Yes. And that piece is now actually sitting in DC at the current site of the museum in a actual tribute to Wild Style, along with a jacket and some pictures and flyers that were donated by different actors in the movie. And it's actually now been signed by Charlie Ahern. So it definitely found a good home. So we thank you again. My last question, if you could tell me a bit about the world-class Wrecking Crew jacket that I believe was owned by Dr. Dre. A little history on that and how you obtained that.
The purple jacket?
Yes.
Yes. So that came to us from Lonzo Williams.
Oh, yes.
Who, so another, great example of provenance. And Lonzo was one of the founders of the world-class Wrecking Crew. Yes. He got Dr. Dre and others to come together, and they would DJ. That's kind of how it started, they DJ, and I'm forgetting the name of the club. Eve After Dark. That's right, Eve After Dark.
Yes.
They would do these DJ gigs at Eve After Dark, and the crew kind of included some of the other people who worked at the club. So they actually had these jackets made for all of the members of the crew. And I think it's really interesting because a lot of people, when they think of like their crew or their band or it's just the musicians or just the people who are creating the sound, the music.
Yes.
But they really looked at it as a team. It was like you had the cocktail waitresses and you had other people who worked there, and they understood that they were just as important to the success of the crew as the guys who were up there DJing. So that's something I really like about that jacket, is it was made for, and I'm forgetting the woman who it was made for, but it was made for one of the women who worked at the club, who was probably a cocktail waitress.
Yes.
And they viewed it as a big team, and they were putting these evenings on. It was a whole shebang, not
Yes.
just the music, but the vibe was created by everybody on the team. So
that is great. That is great. Well, that's it. I appreciate your time. I definitely appreciate the the behind the scenes answers. I always wonder who the owner of the Biggie Crown was, and the backstory of that. So I appreciate you telling me about all those things, and even the origins of the auction. Much appreciated.
yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, thanks for your time, and I'll see you on the next one. I definitely plan on being there as well. I'm looking forward to it.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.